Hey, greetings everybody, GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we kind of read an interlude of in this Arthas, starting the second part in the Arthas Rise of the Lich King, which I think is really the main part of the book. And it was just sort of Aegwynn, an old Aegwynn, sitting with Jaina, an adult 30-year-old Jaina. So this seems to be a little bit in the future, maybe even closer to the Wrath of the Lich King expansion than the actual events that we're about to read. And they're both just kind of thinking about Arthas and thinking about the vibes he's sending off from Northrend, kind of as the Lich King foreshadowing. And so they decide, like, hey, let's talk about it. Let's talk about him and how he got there. So we're going to basically spend this whole second part doing that, and we'll sprinkle it in throughout. Also, just some housekeeping. I had mentioned on the last episode, or the one before that I was going to organize, curate everything, put it into playlists now that we have so many episodes, in case you ever wanted to just, you missed some, or you wanted to go back and just not go in the order, but just stick to one content, one book, whatever. I've been doing that. If you want to check back, it's there. I wish I would have started earlier because it's been pretty tedious. I've caught up maybe about the first 450 episodes, so I have about 100 or so to go. I'll finish it tonight after this episode's done. All right, but stay a while and listen to this one. It's Chapter 6 of Arthas, the Rise of the Lich King. Jaina Proudmoore hummed a little as she strode through the gardens of Dalaran. She'd been here for 8 years now, and the city never lost its sense of wonder. Everything here emanated magic, and to her it was almost like a scent, a fragrance of everything in bloom, and she inhaled it with a smile. So time has passed, because remember we left off, she was just going there. So now you could make the argument that they're around 18, 19, 20, her and Arthas, somewhere around there. Of course, some of that fragrance was that of actual flowers in bloom. The gardens of this place were as saturated with magic as everything else. She had never seen healthier, more colorful flowers or eaten more delicious fruits and vegetables than here. And the knowledge! Jaina felt she had learned more in the last 8 years than in her entire life. Well, that's easy to do when you're like 20 years old. And most of that in the last 2, since Archmage Antonidas had formerly taken her as his apprentice. Few things contented her more than sitting curled up in the sun with a cold glass of sweet nectar and a pile of books. Of course, some of the rarer parchments needed to be protected from sunlight and spilled nectar, so the next best thing was sitting inside one of the many rooms wearing gloves so her hands would not damage the fragile paper, carefully perusing something that was older almost than she could comprehend. But for now, she just wanted to wander in the gardens, feeling the living earth beneath her feet, smelling the incredible scents, and when hunger gnawed at her stomach, reaching up and plucking a ripe golden bark apple, warm from the sunlight, and crunching it happily. That's funny because the golden bark apples are an actual food you can eat. In Quel'Thalas, came a smooth, cultured voice. There are trees that tower over these in a glory of white bark and golden leaves that all but sing in the evening breezes. I think you would enjoy seeing them some day. Jaina turned to offer Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider, son to Anasterion, king of the Quel'Drai elves, a smile and a deep curtsy. Your Highness, she said, I wasn't aware you'd returned. A pleasure. And yes, I'm certain I would. Jaina was the daughter, if not of royalty, of nobility and of a ruler. Her father, Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, ruled the city-state of Kul'Tiras, and Jaina had grown up accustomed to interaction with nobility, and yet Prince Kael'thas unnerved her. She wasn't quite sure what it was. He was handsome, certainly, with that grace and beauty that all elves possessed. Tall, with hair spun gold that fell halfway down his back, he always looked to her like a figure out of legend rather than a real living person. Even though he was currently clad in the simpler violet and gold robes of a mage of Dalaran and not the lavish robes he would wear to official occasions, he never seemed to lose his stiffness. Perhaps that was it. There was a sort of antiquated formality about him. 2, he was much older than she, though he looked about her age. He was sharply intelligent and an extremely talented and powerful mage, and some of the students whispered that he was one of the 6, the secret membership of the highest-ranking magi of Dalaran. So she supposed she wasn't that much of a country bumpkin to find him intimidating, and we know he is one of the 6 from our previous books. Also foreshadowing that that he has this legendary appearance. Yeah, he definitely is crucial to Warcraft lore. Essentially, the leader of the Blood Elf race, and even in Shadowlands, hugely important. He reached up and took an apple himself, biting into it. There is a certain hardiness about food native to human lands that I've come to appreciate, he smiled conspiratorially. Sometimes elven food, while certainly delicious and attractively presented, leaves one still hungry for something more substantial. Jaina smiled. Prince Kael'thas always tried so hard to put her at ease. She only wished it worked better. Few things are nicer than an apple and a slice of Dalaran shop, she agreed. There's more actual food. The silence stretched between them, awkward despite the casualness of the setting and the warmth of the sun. So, you're back for a while. I like that because it makes you feel like Christy Golden must really be like a Warcraft player, like not just casual either. Like she must play a lot. Yes, but my business in Silvermoon has concluded for the time being, so I should not need to depart again any time soon. He looked at her as he took another bite of the apple, his handsome features schooled to be impassive. Still, Jaina knew he was waiting for her reaction. We are all pleased at your return, Your Highness. He wagged a finger at her. I've told you. I would prefer it if you would simply call me Kael. I'm sorry, Kael. He looked at her, and a hint of sorrow passed over his perfect features, gone so quickly that Jaina wondered if she had imagined it. How do your studies progress? Very well, she said, warming to the conversation now that it was back on scholastic ground. Watch. She pointed to a squirrel perched in a high branch, nibbling on an apple, and murmured a spell. At once it transformed into a sheep, a look of comical surprise on its face as the branch broke beneath its weight and it started to fall. Immediately Jaina extended a hand and the squirrel sheep halted in mid-air. Gently she lowered it unharmed to the ground. It bleated at her, twitching its ears, and after a moment again resumed the shape of a very confused-looking squirrel. It sat on its haunches, chattered at her angrily, and with a flick of its fluffy tail, leaped up into the tree again. So she's just shown that she can cast Polymorph and Levitate. Or Featherfall, Slowfall. Kael'thas chuckled. Well done. No more setting books on fire, I hope. Jaina turned scarlet, remembering the incident. When she'd first arrived, her talent with fire had needed some desperate honing. She'd accidentally incinerated a tome while working with Kael'thas, one he'd actually been holding at the time. He'd responded by insisting that for the next few months she would need to practice all fire spells in the vicinity of the pools that encircled the prison area. No, that hasn't happened for a while. So I wonder if she would be, I mean, she can use all the specs, obviously, but I always feel like she'd most likely be like a frost mage. I'm pleased to hear it. Jaina, he stepped forward, tossing away the half-eaten apple, smiling gently. I wasn't making idle conversation when I invited you to come to Quel'Tha Loss. Dalaran is a marvelous city, and some of the finest magi in Azeroth live here. I know you're learning much, but I think you would enjoy visiting an entire land where magic is so much a part of the culture, not just a part of the city or confined to a handful of elite educated magi. Magic is the birthright of every citizen. We are all embraced by the Sunwell. Surely you must have some curiosity about it yourself. She smiled at him. I do indeed, and I would love to go there some day, but I think for the moment my studies can be best advanced here. Her smile stretched into a grin, where people know what to do when I light books on fire. He chuckled at that, but his sigh was sad. Perhaps you are right, and now if you will excuse me. He gave her a wry grin. Archmage Antonidas demands a recounting of my time in Silvermoon. Nonetheless, this prince and mage looks deeply forward to more demonstrations of how your training has advanced, and more time spent with you. Kael'thas placed a hand to his heart and bowed. Not knowing how to respond, Jaina settled for a curtsy, then watched him go, striding through the gardens like the sun, head high, every inch of him exuding confidence and coiled grace. Even the dirt seemed unwilling to cling to his boots and robe him. Jaina crunched a final bite of the apple, then she too tossed it away. The squirrel she'd polymorphed earlier scurried headfirst down the trunk to claim a prize more reachable than the apple that still hung on the tree. A pair of hands abruptly covered her eyes. She started, but only in mild surprise. No one who posed a threat would be able to breach the powerful wards erected about the magical city. "Guess who?" a male voice whispered, but still holding tones of mirth. Jaina, her eyes covered, considered, fighting back a smile. Your hands are callous, so you're not a wizard," she said. "You smell like horses and leather." Her own small hands brushed feather light over strong fingers, touching a large ring. She felt the shape of the stone, the design, the seal of Lordaeron. "Arthas!" she exclaimed, surprise and delight warming her voice as she turned to face him. He uncovered her eyes at once and grinned down at her. He was less physically perfect than Kael'thas. His hair, like the elven prince's, was blonde, but simply yellow rather than looking like spun gold. He was tall and well-built, seeming solid rather than fluidly graceful to her, and despite the fact that he was of a rank equal to Kael'thas, although she wondered if privately Kael doubted that, the elves seemed to think of themselves as superior to all humans, regardless of rank. There was an ease about him that Jaina responded to immediately. Decorum returned to her, and she dropped a curtsy. "Your Highness, this is an unlooked-for surprise. What are you doing here, if I may ask?" A sudden thought sobered her. "All is well in Capital City, is it not?" "Arthas, please. In Dalaran the Magi rule, and mere men must give deference." His sea-green eyes twinkled with good humor. "And we are comrades in mischief, after sneaking off to see the internment camps, aren't we?" She relaxed and smiled. "I suppose we are. In answer to your question, everything is just fine. In fact, so little of real import is going on that my father agreed to my request to come here for a few months to study." "Study? But you're a member of the Order of the Silver Hand. You're not going to become a mage, are you?" He laughed and drew her arm through his as they walked back toward the students' quarters. She easily fell in step with him. "Hardly. Such intellectual dedication is beyond me, I fear. But it did occur to me that one of the best places in Azeroth to learn about history, the nature of magic, and other things a king needs to know about is right here in Dalaran. Fortunately, Father and your Archmage agreed." As he spoke, he covered Jaina's hand, resting on his arm with his own. It was a friendly and courteous gesture, but Jaina felt a little spark go through her. She glanced up at him. "I'm impressed. The boy who sneaked me out in the middle of the night to go spying on orcs was not quite so interested in history and knowledge." Arthas chuckled and bent his head conspiratorially down to hers. "Honestly, I'm still not. I am. But that's not the real reason I came here." "All right, now I'm confused. Why did you come to Dalaran then?" They had reached her quarters, and she stopped, turning to face him and releasing his arm. He didn't answer at first, merely held her gaze with his hand and smiled knowingly. Then he took her hand and kissed it, a courtly gesture, one she had experienced many times from many noble gentlemen. His lips lingered just an instant longer than was strictly proper, and he didn't release her hand at once. Her eyes widened. Was he implying? Had he really contrived to come to Dalaran for a few months? No mean feat. Antonidas was notoriously leery of outsiders. Simply to see her? Before she could recover sufficiently to ask the question, he winked at her and bowed. "I will see you tonight at dinner, my lady." The dinner was a formal one. The return of Prince Kael'thas and the arrival of Prince Arthas on the same day had sent those who served the Kirin Tor into a flurry of activity. There was a large dining room that was reserved for special occasions, and it was here that the dinner was hosted. A table large enough to seat over 24 stretched from one end of the room to the other. Overhead, 3 chandeliers twinkled with brightly burning candles, echoed by the candles burning on the table. Sconces along the walls held torches, and to keep the ambiance gentle while still providing sufficient illumination, several globes hovered around the sides of the room, ready to be summoned where a little extra light might be needed. Servants rarely intruded save to bring out and clear the courses. Bottles of wine poured themselves with the flick of a finger. Flute, harp, and lute provided soothing background music, their graceful notes created by magic rather than human hands or breaths of air. Archmage Antonidas presided in one of his rare appearances. He was a tall man, seeming all the taller because of his extremely thin build. His long beard now had much more gray than brown in it, and his head was completely bald, but his eyes were alert and piercing. Present also was Archmage Crasus, upright and alert, his hair catching the candle and torchlight to gleam mostly silver with red and black streaks. Many others were in attendance, all of high rank. Jaina, in fact, was far and away the lowest-ranking person present, and she was the Archmage's apprentice. Jaina came from a military background, and one of the things her father had instilled in her was a solid understanding of her strengths and weaknesses. "It is as much of a mistake to underestimate yourself as to overestimate yourself," Dalen had once told her. "False modesty is as bad as false pride. Know exactly what you are capable of at any moment and act accordingly. Any other path is folly and could be deadly in battle." She knew she was deft in the magical arts. She was intelligent and focused and had learned much in the short time she had already been here. Surely Antonidas would not take on an apprentice as a charity case. With no sense of the false pride her father had warned her so judiciously about, she understood she had the potential to become a powerful mage. She wanted to succeed on her own merit, not be advanced because an elven prince enjoyed her company. She fought to keep her face from betraying her irritation as she spooned up another mouthful of turtle bisque, another food from the game. The conversation, not surprisingly as the internment camps were located fairly close to Dalaran, focused on the orcs, although the Mage City liked to think itself above such things. Kiel reached a long, elegant hand for another slice of bread and began buttering it. "Lethargic or no," he said, "they are dangerous." "My father King Taranis agrees with your assessment, Prince Caelthus," Arthas said, smiling charmingly at the elf. "That's why the camps exist. It is unfortunate that they cost so much to maintain, but surely little gold is a small price for the safety of the people of Azeroth." "They are beasts, brutes," said Caelthus, his normally tenor voice dropping in his disgust. "They and their dragons damaged Quel'Thalas badly. Only the Sunwell's energies prevented them from wreaking even more havoc than they did. You humans could solve the problem of protecting your people without taxing them so severely, by simply executing the creatures." Jaina recalled the one glimpse she had seen of the orcs. They had looked weary to her, broken and dejected. They'd had children with them. "Have you been to the camps, Prince Caelthus?" she said tartly, speaking before she could stop herself. "Have you actually seen what they have become?" Color rose in Caelthus's cheeks for a moment, but he kept his expression pleasant. "No, Lady Jaina, I have not, nor do I see any need to. I see what they have done whenever I behold the burned trunks of the glorious trees of my homeland, and pay my respects to those slain in that attack. And surely you have not seen them either. I cannot imagine that so refined a lady would wish to be given a tour of the camps." Jaina very carefully did not look at Arthas as she replied, "While His Highness gives me a lovely compliment, I do not think that refinement has any bearing on one's desire to see justice. Indeed, I think it rather more likely that a refined individual would not wish to see sentient beings slaughtered like animals." She gave him a pleasant smile and continued eating her soup. Caelthus gave her a searching look, confused by her reaction. "The law is Lordaeron's, and King Taranis may do as he sees fit in his own realm," Antonidas broke in. "Dalaran and every other Alliance kingdom also must pay for their upkeep." "Oh?" said a mage Jaina did not know. "Surely we have a voice in this, since we are paying for it." Antonidas waved a thin hand. "It is not the issue of who pays for the camps, or indeed whether the camps are even necessary. It is this strange lethargy of the orcs that intrigues me. I have researched what little we have on orcish history, and I do not believe it is confinement that renders them so listless. Nor do I believe it is an illness, at least not one that we need worry about contracting." And we learned that it's because the demonic energies were in withdrawal. Because Antonidas never indulged in idle chatter, everyone stopped their bickering and turned to listen to him. Jaina was surprised. This was the first she had heard from any of the Magi regarding the orcish situation at all. She had no doubt that this was a deliberate decision on Antonidas' part to reveal this information at this time. With both Arthas and Caelthus present, word would travel swiftly throughout Lordaeron and Quel'Thalas. Antonidas did little by accident. "If it is not an illness, nor a direct result of their internment," Arthas said pleasantly, "then what do you think it is, Archmage?" Antonidas turned toward the young prince. "It is my understanding that the orcs were not always so bloodthirsty. Khadgar told me what he had learned from Garona, who..." Garona was the half-breed who murdered King Lane, Arthas said, all trace of good humor gone. With all due respect, I do not think we can trust anything such a creature says. Antonidas lifted up a calming hand as some of the others began to murmur agreement. This information came before she turned traitor, he said, and it has been verified through other sources. He smiled a little, deliberately refusing to identify what other sources he had consulted. They committed themselves to demonic influence. Their skin turned green, their eyes red. I believe they were saturated with this external darkness by the time of the first invasion. Now they have been cut off from that source of sustenance. I think we are seeing not an illness, but withdrawal. Demonic energy is a potent thing. To be denied it would have dire consequences. All right, cool. So we're exposing that revelation. Kael'thas waved a hand dismissively. Even if such a theory is correct, why should we care about them? They were foolish enough to trust demons. They were thoughtless enough to permit themselves to become addicted to these corruptive energies. I, for one, do not think it is wise to help them find a cure for this addiction, even if it could return them to a peaceful state. Right now they are powerless and crushed. It is how I and anyone in his right mind prefer to see them, after what they have done to us. Ah, but if they can be returned to a peaceful state, then we will not have to keep them locked up in the camps, and the money can be distributed elsewhere, Antonidas said mildly before the entire table could erupt in argument. I'm sure King Taranis does not levy these fees simply to line his own pockets. How does your father fare, Prince Arthas? And your family? I regret that I was unable to attend your initiation ceremony, but I hear it was quite the event. Stormwind was most gracious to me, Arthur said, smiling warmly and digging into the second course of delicately broiled trout served with sautéed greens. It was good to see King Varian again. His lovely queen has recently provided him with an heir, I understand. Indeed, and if the way little Anduin grips my fingers any indication of how he'll grip a sword one day, he'll make a fine warrior. While we all pray your coronation day is many years distant, I dare say that a royal wedding would be welcomed, Antonidas continued. Have any young ladies caught your eye, or are you still Lord Ron's most eligible bachelor? Kael'thas turned his attention to his plate, but Jaina knew he was following the conversation keenly. She kept her own face carefully composed. Arthas did not look in her direction as he laughed and reached for the wine. Ha! That would be telling, would it not? Where's the fun in that? There's plenty of time left for such things. Mixed feelings watched over Jaina. She was a little disappointed, but also somewhat relieved. Perhaps it was best if she and Arthas remained only friends. After all, she had come here to learn how to be the most accomplished mage she could become, not flirt. A student of magic needed to be disciplined, to be logical, not emotional. She had duties and needed to perform them with her full attention. She needed to study. I need to study, Jaina protested a few days after the dinner when Arthas approached her leading 2 horses. Come on, Jaina, Arthas grinned. Even the most diligent student needs to take a break now and then. It's a beautiful day, and you should be out enjoying it. I am, she said. It was true. She was in the gardens with her books, rather than cloistered in one of the reading rooms. A bit of exercise will help you think better. He extended a hand to her as she sat underneath the tree. She smiled despite herself. Arthas, you will be a magnificent king one day, she said teasingly, grasping his hand and allowing herself to be pulled to her feet. No one can seem to deny you anything. He laughed at that and held her horse while she mounted. She was wearing trousers today, light linen breeches, and was able to sit astride rather than side-straddle with long robes. He swung up easily on his own horse a moment later. Jaina glanced at the horse he was riding, a bay mare rather than the white stallion fate had snatched from him. I don't think I ever said how sorry I was about Invincible, she said quietly. The mirth left his face, and it was like a shadow passing over the sun. Then the smile returned, slightly sobered. It's all right, but thanks. Now I have picnic supplies, and the day awaits. Let's go. It was a day Jaina would remember for the rest of her life. One of those perfect late summer days where the sunlight seemed thick and golden as honey. Arthas set a hard pace, but Jaina was an experienced rider and kept up easily. He took her far away from the city and along stretches of green, expansive meadows. The horses seemed to be enjoying themselves as much as their riders, their ears pricked forward and their nostrils flaring as they inhaled the rich scents. The picnic was simple but delicious fare. Bread, cheese, fruits, and light white wine. Arthas lay back, folding his arms behind his head, and dozed for a bit, while Jaina kicked off her boots, digging her feet into the thick, soft grass, as she sat with her back to a tree, and read for a while. The book was interesting, a treatise on the nature of teleportation, but the languid heat of the day, the vigorous exercise, and the soft hum of cicadas served to lull her to sleep as well. You know, in Dalaran, you can get that achievement for finding all the different magic books. I don't think that's one of them, but it might be. That'd be funny if it was. Jaina awoke sometime later, slightly chilled. The sun was starting to go down. She sat up, knuckling the sleep out of her eyes to realize that Arthas was nowhere to be seen, nor was his horse. Her own gelding, reins draped about a tree branch, grazed contentedly. Frowning, she got to her feet. Arthas? There was no answer. Likely he had just decided to go for a quick exploration and would be back any moment. She strained to listen for the sound of hoofbeats, but there were none. There were still orcs loose wandering around, or so the rumors went, and mountain cats, and bears. Less alien, but no less dangerous. Mentally, Jaina went over her spells in her mind. She was sure she'd be able to defend herself if she was attacked. Well, fairly sure. The attack was sudden and silent. A thump against the back of her neck and cold wetness was the first and only clue she had. She gasped and whirled. Her attacker was a blur of motion, leaping to another hiding space with the speed of a stag, pausing only long enough to fire another missile at her. This one caught her in the mouth and she started to choke with laughter. She pawed at the snow, gasping a little as some of it slid down her shirt. Arthas, you don't fight fair! Her answer was 4 snowballs rolled in her direction, and she scrambled to pick them up. He'd obviously climbed high enough to find the places in the mountains where winter had come early and returned with snowballs as trophies. Where was he? There, a flash of his red tunic. The fight continued for a while until both had run out of ammunition. Truce, Arthas called, and when Jaina agreed, laughing so hard she could barely get the word out, he leaped from his place of concealment among the rocks and ran to her. He hugged her, laughing as well, and she was pleased to see that he too had traces of snow in his hair. I knew it all those years ago, he said. Knew what? Jaina had been pelted with so many snowballs that despite the fact that it was late summer, she was chilled. Arthas felt her shivering and tightened his arms around her. Jaina knew she should pull back. A friendly and spontaneous hug was one thing, but to linger in his embrace was something else. But she stayed where she was, letting her head rest against his chest, her ear pressed against his heart, hearing it thump rhythmically and rapidly. She closed her eyes as one hand came up to stroke her hair, removing a bit of snow as he spoke. The day I first saw you, I thought that this would be a girl I could have fun with. Someone who wouldn't mind going for a swim on a hot summer day, or he stepped back a little, brushing a few bits of melting pieces of winter off her face and smiling, or getting a snowball on the face. I didn't hurt you, did I? She smiled in return, suddenly warmed. No, you didn't. Their eyes met, and Jaina felt heat coming to her cheeks. She moved a step back, but his arm encircled her as firmly as an iron band. He continued to touch her face, trailing strong, calloused fingers down the curve of her cheek. Jaina, he said quietly, and she shivered, but not from cold, not this time. It was not proper. She should move back. Instead, she lifted her face and closed her eyes. The kiss was gentle at first, soft and sweet, the first Jaina had ever known. As if of their own will, her arms crept up to drape around his neck, and she pressed against him as the kiss deepened. She felt as though she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in the world. This was who she wanted. This youth who was her friend despite his title, who saw and understood her scholarly character, but also knew how to coax forth the playful and adventurous girl who didn't often have a chance to come out, who wasn't often glimpsed. But he had seen all of who she was, not just the face she presented to the world. Arthas, she whispered as she clung to him. Arthas. Bittersweet, because we all know how it's going to end. All right, we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. We'll continue this romantic kind of interlude series of chapters between the two of them next time. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.